own sort of icon, right? Usually users need to be able to provide their icon in some way, shape, or form. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about that today. There are some gotchas along the way. This process is kind of important because it touches on a lot of little tidbits, a lot of little pieces that we've haven't gotten into yet. So there's a lot of pieces in here that are new and that are useful in general because it applies to other types of things, right? So for instance, part of this process, we have to upload a file. Well, a lot of this code works, whether it's an image or whether it's some other kind of file. So it also gets into that. Another thing that happens is because we're using built-in applications, such as the built-in camera app, the camera hardware, that does mean we also get into, well, what happens if you need hardware such as the camera that is available on most devices but not necessarily all? What happens if you need to get data or work with other applications on the device? Because we've been focused really on just ours, and we haven't done too much with what I previously talked about as implicit intents. So implicit intents is one part of this. Getting results back from another activity is also part of this, and working with that. There are one of the there's a lot of topics that kind of filter into this. One of the big gotchas though here, and this is what I kind of, as I've been putting things together, is unfortunately like the documentation for how to do this is scattered in 50 different places. Like there's a little bit here and a little bit here and a little bit here. So bringing it together has been kind of difficult to get some of those things. There's also been some things that have changed even since last year with how Google security works. So even some of the tutorials that are out there aren't completely correct. So there's at least one issue that I haven't sorted out yet, just because of all of the different things, all the issues you run into. So I'll try to cover kind of what we can today. I'm going to cover kind of part of it, and I'll probably definitely have to cover some of it tomorrow because I need to do some additional troubleshooting, and there's just a lot here. So I do want to make sure that you have some lab time to work with. So I'm going to try and limit this to maybe 2 hours at max, so that you still have some lab time to continue on with that, because I know some of you are still working with the previous phase of code, and that's fine. Okay. The good news is, in the grand scheme of things, like this part of uploading a photo, it's somewhat less code. It's not necessarily a huge amount of code, but it's a lot of new code and a lot of new concepts, unfortunately. So it in terms of line count, it's relatively small. It's still a lot more than I would expect. It's not as easy as I wish it was, and there's a lot of concepts here. Again, so that's kind of the preface. Yeah.
I just have a quick question. I guess before we get into this. With this and like having users being able to upload photos, is there any is there ever going to be like any sort of like measures we'd have to take to prevent users from like putting up like inappropriate photos or things that would be considered offensive?
Absolutely. Yes, for sure. Absolutely, you have to do that. No, I won't go over how to do that, because that is an entire semester kind of worth of stuff. But right, because how do you block that, right? Well, first of all, you have to have some way, usually to bring admins in and for them to moderate it and to give them alerts that users registering up, or give them an approval process to say, it has to go through them before the icon shows up, and how do you detect that? And okay, now you've got 1 million users, so it's not even practical to have a person in there doing it. So like if you look at large companies that have this, there's also AI in there. So oftentimes at that point, to fully get that review process, you have to talk about giving other people permissions, and you have to use AI to filter it down and say, well, here are the things that were flagged and need special review. So it can quickly become an issue from multiple regards. One of it, just inappropriate images, is one issue, but you also have to deal with copyright issues as well, unfortunately. So it's like, well, okay, well, what happens if a user uploads something that's a copyrighted work of art? Or what if somebody's uploading a profile image that is not themselves, that is stolen from somebody else? That happens a lot, more than we'd like, where people are impersonating other users. So that in of itself is a whole ball of wax that I won't get into. But it is important, and it's unfortunately something you can't really ship an app without at some point tackling. The one exception to that is if you have an app that's only for your company, yeah, you can kind of get away with not worry about it too much, because then you just deal with, hey, it's, you write up an HR complaint or whatever, and it becomes HR department's mostly problem, and less so your application problem. But if you have actual customers that are putting their profile icons in there, then yeah, makes sense. So that's the kind of long and short of it. It's kind of beyond the scope of what we have to tackle. It figures into some of the tools we've talked about, but also things like AI we aren't going to talk about. So there's a lot of pieces that can come into that. So general overview of things we want to get out of this. We want to talk about Firebase Storage, which is the third service that Firebase provides. So far we've talked about Firestore, which is their database system, as well as authentication, which is their login and user management system. So with this, we're also going to talk about storage, which is the third way. Basically, this is a way to host files within their own system, or specifically files that users can upload and manage and work with. So we're going to be uploading images to Firebase Storage. That's where we're going to host the images that the users upload as their avatars or their profile images. We also need to, once we've gotten those up in Firebase Storage, we also have to update both auth and the database itself, the Firestore database, with that updated image. Because remember, we're storing a copy, we're storing a URL for the image in both places, right? So the process kind of looks like upload it to storage, get a URL to download it, and then put that download URL into both auth and the database. So it's kind of a 4-step process to do that. Several of those steps are non-trivial, those 4 steps, okay, unfortunately. We're going to talk a little bit about implicit intents, because that's one part of getting things from the camera or getting it from the gallery. Is we got to talk a little bit about using implicit intents. We're going to use an implicit intent to start the camera app to get pictures that way. We want to capture a photo from the camera, and then we want to get that image back into our application. And we'll also look at how to use an implicit intents to basically get into the Photos app so that they can pick a photo from there. Okay? So there's a good amount of reading material that you can check up here. There's 2 pages I linked from the main Firestore just as a review. There's a page about the authentication system managing users. That's where you're going to find the documentation about how to update the user info in the auth database. And also there's a document, an article there from Firestore that talks about how do we update the document in the Firestore database. So we have both of those. In addition to that, I've linked a few things here in terms of the storage APIs. That's the kind of set of tutorials. And then there's also some things I've linked here, which is related to some of the different topics that we're going to be talking about in terms of Android that are new, right? So there's a few different, you can see that there's a bit of surface area that we have to cover to get to this. So let's talk about what Firebase Cloud Storage is. So cloud storage provides a place for users to upload, to store files, and store files such as, say, images, which we're going to do today. You also put things up like video and audio, PDFs, other documents they have. If they have Word documents, resumes, anything like that, those are also things that we could potentially upload using storage, right? So storage actually covers a lot of things, but in general, it's anything that the user is uploading, right? If they're files that we're providing for, say, a website, there's a different system for hosting those. That's a different service. They call it Firebase Hosting. but this is specifically for user created files. If you were having the users say add games to the database, then that might also include them uploading screenshots, right? So screenshots would also fall into your things we would store potentially under storage, right? So it's useful for a lot of things. Historically, the way that that's been largely done is if you're not using Firebase, usually what you're going to do is you're going to go grab your favorite cloud hosting service, pay them some money, use their hosting service to provide this. So for instance, with AWS, that's their AWS S3 service, where you can upload files there. So that's usually how I would do it if I was building a website and not using Firebase. It would be Amazon Web Service and using their S3 service. This is built onto Google's own cloud storage system, so that's kind of underneath it. If you were to get the nitty-gritty and not use Firebase, you would be using their cloud storage system underneath. So this is kind of a layer on top of another service that they provide. Okay, this just works well with Firebase. So the other thing just to mention, you know, cloud storage, it's another service, it's another part of Firebase. It does integrate really well with both authentication and the Firestore. It does work really well with both of those because it's been built to kind of interop. Okay, so that means things like, because we set up authentication, we can use some security rules to also secure the storage service. It's just a different set of rules. Okay. So their general introduction, you know, reading this from their introduction page, is cloud storage is built for app developers who need to store and serve user-generated content, such as photos or videos, and cloud storage is a powerful, simple, cost-effective object storage service built from Google's scale. So it's something that Google's built, maintained. You're kind of getting all the benefits from there because they've already dealt with a lot of issues that you might otherwise encounter if you build this yourself. So I want to play this video real quick because it's a good kind of intro to what this is, explains kind of a quick overview of why you might want it, etc. So I'm going to go ahead and pop that in. I think I need to switch my audio so that this gets recorded. So I need to run that cable up here and into there. And turn this on. We'll probably turn it down. Okay, let's try to play it and see if it comes through. There we go.
We all know from experience that people love to share things about themselves, such as photos, videos, and GIFs that express their feelings. So what do you do to let them store and share these files through your app? That's where Firebase Storage can help. Our storage API lets you upload your users' files to our cloud so they can be shared with anyone else. And if you have specific rules for sharing files with certain users, you can protect this content for users logged in with Firebase authentication. Security, of course, is our first concern. All transfers are performed over a secure connection. Also, all transfers with our API are robust and will automatically resume in case the connection is broken. This is essential for transferring large files over slow or unreliable mobile connections. And finally, our storage, backed by Google Cloud Storage, scales to petabytes. That's billions of photos to meet your app's needs, so you will never be out of space when you need it. So give your users space to share their lives with Firebase Storage, available right now for iOS, Android, and web applications. And to learn more about Firebase Storage, check out the documentation available right here.
So that's the quick marketing sort of intro to it. It's a really solid service option as far as what's out there. It's very rare that today we build these systems completely from scratch. It's generally impractical to completely build the storage part of it yourself because of everything that goes in here and managing hard drives and all those kind of things. So you're usually using something AWS or Google or whatever service to actually do the hosting. So this is really common, regardless if you're building mobile apps or web apps, etc. Okay, so To get started with the Google Cloud Storage, where we're going to start, as we have usually, is to go back to the console, right? And so just like we had to do with Firestore and authentication, we had to go turn the system on first, right? To say, hey, yes, I do want to opt into this. So what you want to do is pull up the console. Okay, I'm going to pick my project, and then you're going to go into the storage tab here on the left. Okay. More than likely, there will be a button there that says "Getting Started." Get started. You want to go ahead and click on that. If it appears, and go ahead and get. That's going to get it registered for you. So this is the main API that we'll go through. This is the main page that you'll go through if you want to manage it and work on it on the back end to see what files are uploaded there. Right now you won't have any files there, but you can look on my screen. You'll see in mine, because I've been playing with this, I already have one. So I have like a user folder here. You can see there's a folder specifically that has their user ID, and then there's this profile photo.png. Right? So once you start getting files uploaded, you'll see files and folders here with a preview of, for instance, this image. I can see how big it is. I can see when it was uploaded, etc., etc. So this is helpful for managing, but all we wanted to do right now is really to just turn it on. The other thing we need to do is, by default, the rules for this is very restrictive. Like the rules and the security for this doesn't really allow you to do anything. So let's switch over to the Rules tab and take a look. Okay. Under Rules, right? Let me see if I can go back in history. I don't know that I can. So here's the rules that I've kind of ended up with. Okay. What you likely will have in there, what do you have?
Read, write,
yep.
false.
That's what I thought you did. Okay. So this is me having already changed some things.
This would match all paths.
Yeah.
Double star.
Okay. Yeah. So I don't have a good way to get back to that, so I'm just going to leave that here. So what you probably have in there right now, yeah, as you're saying, is match all paths. It's saying by default, read and writes are both prevented. They're both false, right? So nothing's allowed. It's kind of the same rules as we did with Firestore, right? By default, nothing's allowed. They just had to put that one rule in there to make it a valid rule, because you're required to have one match and you're required to have at least one allow in that match. So what we want to do, right, is kind of say that, hey, we've got some images. We want to allow access to those, namely we want to allow read access to that, but we want to limit write access to them as well. So the structure you can see is kind of very similar. It starts at the top with rules version 2. So just like we did with Firestore, we're going to see there's a service. It says Firebase Storage, right? With the Firestore rules, right? If you remember and you look at what those were, look at those real quick. Rules. You'll see that they started a little bit different, right? So this was for Cloud Firestore, so it said Cloud Firestore. And then you can see the next rule is match databases, database, documents, right? So those first 3 lines are different depending on what service you're working with. Does that make sense? It's a very similar syntax, but it does start differently. So do be careful about that, right? Do be careful about keeping those first few lines the same, which I have. So within there, B is short for bucket. Bucket is basically, you can kind of think about it like a hard drive or a server to store files. In our simple application, we're just going to have one bucket, and that's all you get for free. And that specifically we've set up as located in central US. With a paid system, you can set up multiple buckets, and generally those would be geographically located. So you might have one in eastern US, western US, you might have one in South America, etc. Different places around the globe where your users are. So they're more co-located with users that are kind of uploading those files. Okay? So that's where that might figure in. You might care about that if you're working with more buckets. Okay? O being short for object. An object in this sense can be two things. An object can either be basically a directory or it can be a file. Both of those are considered objects, okay, in this sense. Within there, I've got a match rule here, and this is where I'm saying specifically I want to match a particular file or a file path. So kind of like I did with the Firestore, you can specify, hey, this document, right, or this path to this collection document has these certain rules. So I'm saying, hey, I want to place my profile photos. I'm going to put them at user ID, profile photo.png. So I'm kind of presuming that they're going to be PNG files for this. And so that's kind of my match point. Just like we saw with other things, those curly braces mean that's a variable, so that could be any user ID, right? It's a path variable, okay? Within the rule, I'm saying allow read, which means anything can read it, no conditions on it, just like we saw with Firestore. And then I'm saying for the writing, I'm saying they have to be logged in and they have to be editing themselves. So pretty simple. You can edit your own profile info, which means profile photo, which means you can create a new file there, you can update that file, replace it with the new file, or you can delete it. Same kind of thing, it's just combined as shorthand. Cool, makes sense? So the rules kind of make sense there. What I want you to do is put those same rules into your system, into your rules side. You might see on the slides that I've already entered that in here, so if you want to copy that from there, feel free. So those are the rules that we need to set up on the back end. So the only thing that allows us to do is read that one file, and you can write your own file. No other files in the system are allowed to be accessed in any way. If we had things like screenshots, etc., those might be uploaded. If your reviews could include an image, we might have additional rules. So you're just going to add, if we added additional places or different reasons you wanted to upload a file, then we'd add additional rules for those.
So this presumes.
Yep.
This presumes that you kind of want us to build with a user folder, and then each item in the user folder is like a subfolder based on the user ID.
Exactly.
And then that we're also going to name each profile photo.png.
Exactly. So there are some assumptions baked in there, right? We're assuming that every user gets their own folder, which is a good base assumption. That's a good base assumption for almost anything that you build. You say, hey, my files are going to be in my folder. It makes security really easy to deal with there. And then, yeah, I'm saying that there's a file within that folder which has to have a specific name, because we're using that image for a very specific purpose, right? And they can't have more than one profile photo, so we might as well just give it a name we know ahead of time. Cool. Questions? That much make sense? Okay, so that's the rules setup. That's the way we say you're allowed to access this. Next thing, we want to then start adding this as a dependency. We want to start working this into our Android project. So we've set up the part that we need on the console. This is really just to set up those rules. On the project, we now need to add some additional dependencies. Okay, so previously we've added Firestore, and we added auth. We've also added some additional ones down at the bottom here. You can see for auth and for the auth UI, as well as for operating with Google Play or the Google services. So we've added all these things in. We need an additional one there you see in the middle for storage now. So if you want to open up your project, you want to add that in. I think what I'm going to do for illustration purposes today, I think I'm going to start a separate project to try and maintain this. So I am going to create a new project in Android Studio to try and keep this code separate from the movie list project for the moment. I'm going to call this ImageUpload. Oh, and that does mean for this project I'll need to pull down specifically the Google services XML file. So let me grab that from the console. List. Okay, I'm creating a secondary project, so I need to put that in. And register. Oh, okay. Yeah, that's going to mean I need to do that. Okay. So let me go into my other app, authentication. I'm going to go here, project settings. I just copy that. That I generated previously. Okay. I'm going to download the Google Service JSON. I need to drop that into this new project. So I need to go to project. I need to go here, app, and drop it in there. So grab that from my downloads. Oop. Okay. Alright, and so I can do that part. Okay. So back here, Android. And I'll probably need to add in login activity to make all this work, but I'm going to start with this. So build Gradle. If I grab, what do I need to grab? I need to grab those dependencies. Okay. So I need to add in all of those dependencies for Firebase. So I'm going to put those in here and sync. So you want to add those dependencies, and then you want to sync it up. Okay. Now, back to here. Nope, I don't want to open up code. I want to open up. Okay. So back to my notes. So we're going to add those dependencies. Next thing up, wherever I want to access storage I need to create an instance of Firebase Storage. This is very similar to how we needed to create maybe an instance of auth, or you need to create an instance of the database. So it's kind of be in the same place. That generally means where we're going to create the storage instance is going to be in the view model, right? So generally speaking, in the view model, up in the constructor for that view model, I might say, hey, create a database, and also now create a storage as well. So we have both of those things there. I'm going to go ahead and start setting that up. So I need to have a view model for this, and I'm going to add that in here. So new Java class, image, upload, view model, add, and that needs to extend a view model. I know I'm probably going to want to do some logging in here. There's a lot of things that happen with testing this where you'll want a log. So I'm going to go ahead and define my log tag before I get down too far. Private static final string log tag is equal to ImageUpload view model class get simple name. Okay, so I'll structure that in. And now in terms of my state stuff or miscellaneous, I need access, generally speaking, to the database. So I might do private static final database. So we're going to do, or no, not static final, private Firebase Firestore. So that's the database, and private Firebase Storage. Call that storage, right? So whatever view model you end up putting this in, which will be my profile, you'll end up having a reference both to the database and to storage. You may also have a reference in there to the user. So I might have Firebase user here as far as things I need to refer to. When I go down to my constructor now, I'll skip over live data for the moment. Public image view model. Okay. I want to get all three of those things. So this is going to be Firebase Firestore.get instance. Storage is equals Firebase Storage get instance. And user is Firebase auth.get instance get current user. If I wanted to save the auth, I might do that just in case I need it later. I could just say auth and maybe save that first. So auth. Beep. Shorthand that one, just in case I decide I want the auth. Okay. So that's kind of my starting point for hooking all these services up. Is I want the three services that we're working with, as well as a reference to the active user object. Okay. So that's our starting point. Okay. Now, what I want to do, right? What I want to be able to do is somehow upload an image, right? Or particularly, I want to be able to upload profile images, right? So I might start by the main operation that we need to somehow initiate is something that's going to say, well, upload the image given some parameters, right? And that's going to somehow use storage to get it uploaded. Okay. So that's kind of what where a lot of this code is going to fit in is in this place. Some of it's going to be in the activity, some of it's going to be in the view model. There are things that, as far as this goes, there are some parts that you do have to put in the activity, and there are some parts that you do have to or should put in the view model. So just as one thing to be aware of, there is a definite separation where some things will go here and some things will go to the other side. Okay, so this is what we're trying to implement. Well, in terms of, close that. So in terms of working with storage, once I've got that storage instance, the next thing I need is what's called a storage reference, which is very similar to like a collection reference or a document reference. Collection reference kind of, here's the path that's kind of wrap around the path to a collection. You can use that to add and remove things, query it, etc. Here, or you can use a document reference to refer to a particular document and modify that document. Right, so we've kind of already inherently worked with document references a little bit. A storage reference is a reference to a particular object within our storage bucket, right? So that can be a folder or that could be a file. Right? It could be either one. Storage ref could be referring to a file or it could be referring to a folder. Okay. As I said, the files are stored in Google Cloud Storage bucket. The files in this bucket are kind of represented as a hierarchical structure. That's where we get file folders kind of out at the outside, and then files underneath that. That's kind of like similar to how you have it on your your file system. And the way that we're going to construct these is using a path string, right? You can construct them piecemeal by saying, hey, here, let me call this. I could call this. Say, hey, create a reference, and then navigate down to the user folder, navigate down to the user ID, and then navigate to the file. But here, for simplicity's sake, I'm just going to give it a path and go directly to it. Okay? So you can kind of think about that as a directory path. You can see that the different parts of the path are separated with slashes. So we're saying user, we're saying user ID, we're saying profile photo PNG. Cool. So we need to create that. Different things we can use that storage ref to work with. We can do that. We can upload files that way. We can download files. We can read and write metadata, and we can also delete the file once we've got that storage ref. So that's the key entry point to being able to do anything. Is you need a storage ref to know what file, what object are you referring to. Cool. Okay. So that's really step one in trying to upload the file. In trying to upload the profile photo, I need to first create a storage reference. I'm going to do that in our example here. And maybe I will call this upload profile image. Great. So I need to create that storage ref. Storage reference. And that was from storage, get reference. You can see that if you just call get reference with no parameters, that's actually going to take you to the root of your storage, which is generally not where we want to put anything. So I'm going to go directly down to the user that I'm trying to work with. So I could say hard code that in as say a non right now if I wanted to do that. Right now I don't have a particular user that I'm logged in as, at least in this example. Did I do that the same way I did here? Yes. Okay. So I need to create that storage reference first, right? That file may at this point be there, it may not be there. I don't know. But I effectively, in terms of what we're going to do here, whether it's there or not, I'm just going to overwrite it. Okay, makes sense? So that's what I want to build out. This part's variable. That part is where I want to put in the user ID. So I might switch this over to pass that in. Okay. Now, from let me push that down so it's not running off the screen. So one question to ask is, where do I get that user ID? Okay. The user ID is largely going to come from the user, right? If I had a user that's logged in. Right now with this example of path, I don't have a user. I don't have a user that I'm logging in as, so I would need to get that in some way. I would need to kind of hard code this temporarily as something else, right? Which also means that I'm going to temporarily need, what do I want? Let me just say, I'm going to temporarily hard code that as a non, as my user ID, and I'll probably need to update some rules in a bit to allow that. Okay. Ideally, I would want that to be rather than using the anon and having it hard coded. I'd ideally want that to be user get UID, right? But because I don't have the login screen, that's not happening yet. So step one is to get the is to get the storage ref. Okay. One thing to watch out for, obviously, if the user is not logged in, that user is going to be null, right? So right now I'm just hard coding it in as that because that's always the case. All right. What was next on my list? Okay. So in terms of actually uploading the file, once we have a storage ref, Firebase actually provides 3 different ways you can do that. You can call put bytes, you can call put stream, or you can call put file. All of those 3 different methods will allow you to upload the file to the server. Okay. The difference is how they take the data that you want to upload. So for instance, put bytes takes it in as an array of bytes. Okay, so it'd be a byte array. Put stream is going to take it in as an input stream. Put file is going to take it in as a URI. Okay, so we have 3 different ways that we can go through this. All 3 of them return an upload task object. So that's something that we can use to monitor the progress. We can maybe hook it up to a progress bar and see it as it's uploading. You can also tell when it's succeeded or when it's failed. So we can add like the on success callbacks as well as the on failure callbacks to that. Okay, which we generally want to know what that's going to be. All 3 of those put files are just going to start the process. You know, they're going to return before it's done because this is an asynchronous operation. Cool. Now, things to think about. So, put bytes. That's going to work great if I have already a binary array. If I already got my data somehow in binary format, I can just use that and upload it. It's okay for small things, right? If you have something relatively small that you're trying to upload and put into the database, that's kind of the shortest, quickest way to do that, or simplest way. It's usually the least efficient, just as a heads up. Using put bytes is usually the least efficient. So I only would reserve that for things like, hey, maybe I want a hash password or some other MD5, some sort of hash would be usually the only thing I would use that method for. Okay. But it does interface with a lot of things because there's a lot of different ways that you can take something, whether it be an image or a video, and get it into this byte array, or whether it be text. Let's say you've got some text file you want to upload. You might encode that using UTF-8 or some other encoding that would give you a byte array. You could upload it that way. Okay. Biggest problem with that first method is it does require you to have the byte array in the first place, which is pretty memory intensive. Memory is kind of a high premium on mobile devices, right? And so for me to have the entire file in memory might not be a great thing. Okay? Next option I can do is using that stream. Okay, so an input stream is really just a source of bytes. It's a source of data. In order to have an input stream, I don't have to load the entire thing into memory. That's why it's beneficial. In fact, I only have to have the tiny amount that I'm currently reading in memory as it goes over. So oftentimes that may be just like, hey, regardless of the size of the file, I'm going to allocate like a 1 kilobyte buffer, or just 1,000 bytes, actually even. Sorry, yeah, not kilobyte, just 1,000 bytes. And I might say, okay, we're gonna put it in there, transfer it as we get, stream it as we say as piece to piece. So it requires a lot less memory. Make sense? The good news there too is that that input stream is supported by a lot of different sources, right? So we can get input streams from files, from the file system. We can get input streams from reading a URL, a web page from the internet. So we can get that. We can also get input streams from all sorts of systems, including Bluetooth. Right? We could directly say, hey, I'm just gonna, I'm gonna get the input stream from whatever Bluetooth stream I'm going and directly send it over to the storage. Cool. But that's usually the more efficient of the two. Between put bytes and put stream. Put stream is always preferable if you can. Right? It's preferable to have it in a stream over having it in a binary. The last one here requires a URI. Right? So specifically put file is to upload a file that the user has on their device. They have to have it locally stored on their device, and we have to provide a URI for that file. It then gets uploaded. Okay, so that does mean things like what we can't do is I can't directly say, hey, if it's maybe I've got a URL for it online that starts with HTTPS, that won't work with put file. Put file, it has to be a local file in the system. Okay. That gets pretty interesting in the Android world because of some security constraints. So one thing to mention just briefly about file system in general on Android is that, well, your file system is kind of important. You don't want apps reading other apps' files just willy-nilly. So security, actually the original versions of Android actually were pretty lax about things, where there weren't a lot of safeguards between apps reading other apps' files or reading public files. So there's been a bit of changes that have happened in recent years, specifically with Android 9 and 10, to push things to where there's more security around what files can you access and what you have to do in order to be able to access those files. But that's in general, that's actually the one that we're going to end up with. At the end of this process, we're going to end up with put file, because what we're going to end up with is the user's going to take it from their camera or they're going to pick it from their gallery. Both of those cases mean that we're going to end up with a URI for where it is on the actual device. Cool? So that third method is actually the way we're going to go. And it turns out that most of the time that's the way you want to go anyway. But those three options are out there. Now, if you look at the documentation, they do provide an example of one way you might do an image upload. Okay, this is kind of a simple case and works for kind of not, unfortunately, not very real scenarios, but it's a good illustration of some of the things that oftentimes need to occur. Okay, so and it does illustrate some stuff that we'll want to come back to later. So here I've got a method that's going to upload an image. It's taking a storage ref and it's taking a bitmap object. Okay. Now a bitmap object is an Android specific class. Okay. What it represents is a specifically a raster image. Okay. So one of the things to be wary of when we're working in the Android space, it's very common to have both raster images and vector images. Okay. Raster images being PNGs and JPEGs and GIFs. They're all, here's the pixel data. Okay. That we can upload as a file this way. Or you have vector images which have like the instructions for how to draw that. The most common extension you're going to see that is like SVG files or vector images. That's relevant because we have images in our system, for instance, such as a lot of these icons that we've added. If you go new vector asset and I look at some of those, Those are vector images and those are not PNGs. So for instance, if I look at this I see person, right, you can see over on the right, you can see what it looks like, but on the left is the actual code for said image, right? This is not raster data. This is vector data. Does that make sense? Okay. So this particular example that we're looking at here presumes that I've already got a raster image. Okay, so process is a little bit different if you're dealing with vectors versus you're dealing with raster. Cool? Okay, so I'm going to presume for the moment that I've already got it rasterized. Okay. If I'm going to use put bytes, which is what they're doing here, we need to take that bitmap and turn it into a byte array, which then can be uploaded. Okay. So the way we do that, there is on the bitmap class itself, there is a compress method. A compress method asks for what kind of file you're compressing it to. It also asks for how much you want to compress it, and then lastly, the stream that you're going to write that compressed image to. So notice here we're saying that we're going to compress it as a PNG. If I want to compress it as, say, a JPEG, then I would need to pass JPEG as that first argument. Okay. And I'm saying 100%, which really means that we're basically not compressing it. We're keeping it at kind of full resolution, full detail. Okay. If you wanted that to be more compressed, you would actually lower that number. So, like, let's say you want it to be smaller, you would say 90 there. It'd be kind of 90% of its normal size. And that last argument is then has to be specifically an output stream. Java makes this distinction between input streams and output streams. Input streams are things that you can read from, you can't write to. Output streams are things you can write to and not read from, which is kind of weird. It's the output string you can only use to make output or send output, versus input stream you can only get output, get input. Okay, so that's one thing to be aware of. Remember, put stream needs an input stream. Okay, it won't take an output stream because it's reading data, it's not writing, it's not downloading the file. Okay. So in order to do the compression, I need to provide an output stream. The output stream that they've used here is byte array output stream. There are a bunch of different kinds of output streams. So we can use output streams that write to files. We can write to other network resources, such as writing to the web or writing to Bluetooth, etc. But here we're specifically basically writing to memory. So byte array output stream is backed by an array. It's backed by an array of bytes. So if you look internally into the implementation of that, there's an array of bytes. Every time you write to it, it modifies that array of bytes. Cool? It, in some ways, is also growable, kind of like a list is. So it'll initially start at a certain size. As you write more data to it, that byte array will grow. So if it runs out of space, what it'll do is it'll allocate another byte array that is twice the size, copy the data from the old byte array, and then keep going, right? So that means if you have, let's say it starts at being 10 bytes long internally, when it gets to that 10 bytes are full, it will double the size, make a 20 byte array, and a 40 byte array, an 80 byte array, etc. Right? So there is a little bit of a cost to that kind of happening internally. It does matter and it does add up. So we're talking about images. Images are not small. Okay, when we're talking about image data, it's not unusual to see that in the order of megabytes, right? So if I'm starting with something that's 10 bytes in size, that buffer is going to double a lot of times, okay, as we go along. You can hint it when you create the byte array stream, output stream. You can say start at this size instead. So I might say start at 1 million instead, because that I'm like, hey, this is going to be at least a megabyte. But that internally means we're dealing with very large byte arrays internally already. just a thing to be aware of, that those byte arrays are fairly large, and that comes with some costs, okay? So creating and working with that byte array output stream is not free, but we're using it here to be to just be in memory and to not necessarily do any filing. So we do the compression, that gets written to the byte array output stream. It's worth mentioning that this bitmap.compress is a blocking synchronous method, okay? While that compress method is being called, nothing else can happen on that thread. Nothing else can happen on that thread. So that does mean if, say, hey, you're calling this code from user clicking a button, it could potentially take long enough to cause an ANR. Okay, so this is one place where we may need to, potentially, if you're doing this, you may need to introduce some threads. Right, we may need to offload this to a background thread to make sure that the UI stays responsive. Just a big heads up, okay? Once we've done that, we call stream.toByteArray. That's going to take all of the contents that are within that output stream, now that it's compressed, that compressed data. It's going to copy it and return us a byte array, okay? It's important that there's a copy there. Okay, so that's one way we can do this. Once we've got that, we just upload it, we monitor the progress, whatever we need to do. Okay, so that's one way that we can go through uploading images if we assume that we're starting with the bitmap. Cool. Okay, that factors into, if you're looking at some of the code examples and things like that, some places in the documentation you'll see it refer to bitmaps. And that's where that might fit in. Okay. Unfortunately, while that code is kind of simple, it works well for maybe simple cases, small files, small images. It's very rare actually today that we have relatively small files. A lot of modern cameras can tend to take 1080p pictures. Some of them can even take 4K images, right? So if you're talking about a picture coming from a camera, it may actually be quite large. It may actually be quite large to start with. Everybody with me there? That full-size image might be several megapixels inside. So we need to be a little bit more careful, okay, in terms of what we do in real-world applications. Okay, so this is a simple example that you'll see in the code. You might see it some other places online. Don't do this because of some reasons I'll talk about. Two is it's slow. The second is it uses a lot of memory. Okay, so just to break things down a little bit of why we don't want to do this process, okay, well, why is it slow? The process that we're going through is first, in order to start this process at all, we're presuming that we have a bitmap, which means that the entire data of that image is already loaded into memory. Make sense? Okay, so first of all, we have to have that bitmap loaded. That in itself can take some time, okay? Next up, we have to compress it down to be a PNG. That compression also takes time. Third thing we do is then we copy that to a byte array, right? You can see that's happening here on that third line. We're making a copy of it into a brand new byte array. And then finally, we do the upload. So part of the problem is that it's using a lot of memory, and inherently working with a lot of memory takes a lot of time because of some implicit things with both Android and just the hardware in general, and the Java and the hardware in general. The other thing that happens there is, notice I'm doing this, and then that, and then that, and then that. I'm doing those 4 steps straight up like sequentially. So I have to do this entire thing with the file, and then do this entire thing with the file, and then do this entire thing with the file. We could be a lot faster if we could do those things concurrently, right? So if we could do, if we need to load it from the file system and compress it, and then send it over to Firestore, we'd like to do all of that at once, where we kind of do it on a small amount of data at the same time, right? So at the same time that we're loading it from disk, we want to be compressing. At the same time we do that, we're also uploading. So what that means is ideally we should be using streams here. Ideally we should be using streams to go through this process, okay? Rather than using a byte array or using a bitmap anywhere along the way. Cool? Very good with that? So those are some things to watch out for, because we'd like to do this concurrently. I also mentioned that these use a lot of memory, which again factors into the speed question. And so here in this tiny little example, which looks tiny, there's actually 3 copies of the image data. There's actually 3 copies of the image data. So let's say the image is 10 megabytes, right? That's 30 megabytes of memory that you have to use. Might still seem relatively small. It's a lot. It may be enough to crash your app. Just this code alone, depending on the size of the image, right? If you load a 4K image in here, it may or may not crash your app, okay? The other side of things is that you may want to be uploading multiple images at the same time, right? So let's say I'm working with eBay or whatever, and I want to upload all my images at once, or working with Upload a Game, I want to upload all those at once, share a bunch of photos to Facebook. That's going to add up, right? Because we may have multiple things happening simultaneously. So we do care about that. So 3 copies that we got here is the bitmap contains the image data, the byte array output stream contains a copy of the image data, and the byte array also is our 3rd copy. Okay, all 3 of those. Let's say we have X number, 5, 10 megabytes. Multiplying that by 3 as far as what you're using. Okay, so yeah, bitmap has a byte array internally into it, so that's where that's being stored. The byte array output stream, again, also has a byte array. Remember, as I kind of mentioned, as you're writing that, it keeps getting copied and growing. So in reality, there's a bunch more as this runs. It uses a lot more than just the final size, because you have to create an array, throw the old one array, create the array, throw the old one array. And actually, because remember, Java is a garbage collected sort of environment. When it says throw it away, it's just marking as, hey, I'm not using it anymore, which doesn't mean it's immediately thrown away. You know, the smaller buffers still get kept around until the garbage collector kicks in and throws the other stuff away. If you're talking about a 4K image, the garbage collector will kick in during that compression, hands down, because of how much memory you're consuming. Cool. Another gotcha with all that allocation, anytime you allocate a byte array, by the way, in Java, there's a guarantee that that brand new array that you get will be zeroed out. Actually, it doesn't matter whether it's a byte array, it's any kind of array. You're guaranteed the actual data is just going to be zeros. That's interesting because prior to Java, C, and C++, if I allocated an array, what I got in there might potentially be garbage. I wasn't guaranteed that it was going to be zeroed out. C++, C don't guarantee that. They just say, oh, I'm going to get some memory from the operating system. Here you go. And it might have leftover data from some other application. In fact, it might be somebody else's password, which is a whole security discussion in itself, right? So for predictability, Java decided, okay, we're going to zero it out. Well, if I talk about zeroing out an array that has several million entries, that takes a noticeable amount of time, right? If you go into Java and you say, hey, I want an array of 10 million entries, you're going to see it sits there spinning. In fact, that might cause an ANR in Android if you ask for an array that's big enough. Okay, so just because of that zeroing out process, that takes some time. Okay, so when we do this copy, this to array, it's got to allocate the memory, it's got to zero it all out, and then copy the data over. Okay, so all of that ends up with, and the whole reason that to array is making a copy. The point of that is it's trying to enforce encapsulation on the stream. Because if it didn't make a copy, then you would be able to directly access the byte array in the output stream. Make sense? So from that sort of encapsulation perspective, that's why there is a copy there. Okay, everybody good with that? Kind of understand the downside? Make sense what we want to do instead? We'd like to stream it, right? I won't go over necessarily how to do that right now, but that's a very important thing to keep in mind. All right, where we're going to end up though is, as I kind of teased already, is that we're going to end up with a URI. At the end of this process, we're actually going to have a URI, and we're not going to have an array of bytes. And that's where I prefer to be, okay? So as long as I have a URI, then this process is as simple as, hey, take the URI for the image, call put file, and it goes up, okay? Recognize one thing. We have some images that we've included with the app, right? We've added those into the drawable folder. If you were going to try to upload those, then it would be something on the order of, you probably would start with a bitmap of some sort, versus, you know, when we're talking about files that are user provided, that's where we usually have a URI. We usually don't have a URI, just a heads up, for images you're shipping with your app. Okay? All right. So, other things that we might want to do as we're uploading these images, if you looked at the console, go down to this image, you might see over here that there is an other metadata section. So right now I haven't added any metadata to it. But it is possible, in addition to messing with the files, we can also add metadata to our objects that are in the storage bucket. So that includes things like, hey, what is the width of that image? What file format is that image in? What's the height of that image? So those are common things that I might want to add into the metadata so that I can query those without having to download the entire image. Make sense? So oftentimes we may want to add some additional metadata to that. The way we do that here, so we're going to start with a storage ref. You can then call get metadata to pull it out, if you want to pull out the metadata that's there. Or we can update it calling update metadata. So in a lot of ways, update metadata is kind of like a map, kind of like our Firestore database. It's just kind of attached to that file instead of being like the document itself. It's attached to the document. So we can add that in here. So here they're setting content type, custom metadata, so my custom property, my value, again, oftentimes that would be the width and height of the image, aspect ratio if we wanted to do something like that, or or the type of the file it is, etc. That's all relevant. Oftentimes you will use that metadata for things like, okay, I need to fetch the image that's appropriate to my device, right? So maybe you have an image that's scaled well for tablets and another one that's scaled well for photos, so I grab the appropriate resource based on kind of the metadata, and I look at that metadata before I actually do the download, okay? So that's one thing that we commonly use in there. I won't talk about that too much. Once we've uploaded the image, the other thing that we have to do is we actually have to get a URL to download it. So the way that we get a URL to download it is we call get download URL on the storage ref. Okay? So we need to upload it first, and then we need a URL to be able to download it. Okay? That in itself, unfortunately, is also a asynchronous job. So allocating, once it's been uploaded, getting permission, getting a URL that you can use to download it publicly does take some time, so we do have to account for that. So get download URL returns a task that will eventually resolve to a URI. Okay? So let's put a little bit of this together. So if I go back to my code, we created the storage ref already, right? I would prefer that to be the user ID, but it isn't right now. I need to upload a URI. So that it's internally, maybe I'm going to move this, maybe I'm going to move this out. So I'm going to say this is a parameter, string user ID, and I'll just leave that as is. So I need to get the URI. This would be image or profile image URI. So that's going to be pointing to where the file is locally. All right. So from here, I need to say storage ref, and I want to say put file. Okay, and that's going to upload that particular URI. Okay. We haven't talked about how we get that URI yet, and we'll get back to that later. Now, that's going to start the process. Remember, it's asynchronous, so I need to say, what do I do once it's uploaded? So often to that, I may want to add, say, a success listener, add on success listener, or an add on failure listener. Okay, so I can do this either. I can do this. Well, that's one way I can do that, is separate listeners. I think for this purpose, I'm going to do the on complete listener approach, which is both the success and failure. So putting those into one thing. Okay. So here, add on complete listener. So let's see, we get the result, I believe, and the error. I believe that's what we get for that one. Incompatible parameter types. Expected one, but found. Oh, yes. That receives a task. That's what I'm misremembering. Okay. So this onComplete listener will get called whether it succeeds at uploading or whether it fails at uploading. Okay. So first things first, I do need to check if there's an error. So I can say, is it successful? Okay. So I want to deal with the error case first. So if it's not successful, then let's go ahead and log it for the moment. Failed to upload image to. I'm going to go ahead and feed out the storage ref get path, so that'll show us where we tried to upload to. I also want to include the error, so comma task get exception, and that way we're logging the error that occurred as well. So first things first is to catch that and deal with it. If we do get that, if we do successfully upload it, then I might want to say similarly, maybe image uploaded to blah. So that's a log. Should be a log I, not a log E. Okay. So I can either successfully uploaded or I've unsuccessfully uploaded it. Okay. If I've successfully uploaded it, that's where I can ask for the download URL. So here I might say, okay, we got storage ref dot get download URL. And you can see this is kind of nested inside of the other callback. So here we're starting to get nested callbacks. I wish there was a way around that. There kind of is. You can play around with, there's a function called continue with, but for simplicity, I'm going to do this. So get download URL. From there, I'm going to add another onComplete listener. So we tell it what to do when that process completes. And so that's again going to give us a task. And so then I have to determine, you know, did we get a success or failure from that. Now, because I've got task here, maybe I call this maybe I'll call this upload task. No, I'll just call this task 2 for now. So I'm just going to say task 2 or download task. Yeah, download task. Let's call it that. Download task. So download task from there. That's going to give us the URI or not. So we need to say, hey, is this second task, is this successful, right? So did we fail to get that URI, or did we fail, or did we get it? So if we failed, log tag get download URL. Maybe I include the storage ref again for task. Speak download task. Got exception. Otherwise, log I, log tag. The download task. Actually, let me say that. So URI, download, URL. What's that? Right. So we can see just with a simple case here that there's at least 2 things that can fail. Is we can fail to upload the file in the first place, and we can also fail to get a URL to download it. This first part, the main reason that first part's going to fail is if your security rules fail, right? If your security rules fail, there's a violation there. Here, this is less common. So that is generally going to succeed. Okay, that one's more likely to go through. But you're starting to see that I need to do some things sequentially. Cool? And so that means nesting things sequentially. What else do I need to do here? I think maybe the last thing I might want to do is provide some way to show feedback to the user, to the front end, right? So I might want some way to show maybe an error message. I might want some way to show the downloaded, the URL at the end, right? So maybe I add some quick live data for those 2 pieces. So going back up to the top, live data, private, mutable live data, string, and this would be upload error message and private mutable live data URI, the download URL. Okay, so I'm going to expose both of those and create them both in the constructor. So this is related to Firebase. Maybe I'm going to put that comment up here as well. So I need to create both of those live datas. Upload, error message is new, mutable live data, and download URL is new, mutable live data. Okay. So I've got those. I can start to change them in here. So in here, if we fail, let's say we fail to upload it, I may want to give that error message here. Post a value there, and post value here. And finally here we don't have an error, so I'm going to set that to null. And I do have a URL. So post value. Oh, and I named it something else. I named this local variable, so I need to distinguish that. Let me just say this. There we go. So that way, I've got some feedback to the user. If we get all the way down here, I'll show that the URL for it, and otherwise, if either of those things go wrong, we'll be posting an error message. Remember, I need to add getters for both of those live datas. So public live data string get upload error message so return that. Same with the other one, public live data, that's a URI, get download URL, and so it's a return download URL. So I'm starting to kind of expose this stuff so I can read it from the front end. So does this beginning of the process make sense to everybody so far? Two things we have to do, or three things we have to do. We have to create a storage ref to say where we're going to upload it. We have to actually upload the file, and then we have to ask for where can we download it. Part of why we want to ask for that download URL is so that we can then put that into authentication, and we can put that into the Firestore database. Cool. Okay. Let's start hooking a few things up to the front end. So I'm going to go back to the front end. And from here, I need to have some stuff in my layout. So from the front end perspective, I need probably an image view to have some sort of preview of it. I need to add actually a placeholder image, so I'm going to do that before I add the image view in. So let's look at broken image. So I can add that icon. Okay, I see broken image. Next, finish. I think that's all the icon I need right now. So I'm going to keep that. All right, so image view. Yes, I do want to add that. Oh, I didn't take image view, broken image. So it's going to be our kind of our preview. Image preview. And I need one button, which is going to be camera. Or camera button. Putting the text in the wrong place. So I want this to say camera. And I need another button, which is going to be the gallery. Okay, so gallery button. So you can either use the camera to take a picture, or you can use the gallery to pick an existing photo. And what else did I need? I need a text view to show the error message. So error text, and download URL text. Clear all the constraints off of this right now. Okay. And this I do want to have just a quick placeholder. Clear that out. Go here. So just constructing a quick UI for all the functionality that we'll want to address. The width, I need to make this image a little bit bigger, so maybe I make it 200 dp by 200 dp and space it out from the edges a little bit. 8, 8, 8. I'm going to anchor these buttons underneath. And then I'm going to select both of them here from the component tree. I'm going to hit right click. I'm going to go to chain. I'm going to create a horizontal chain. That way they're going to be kind of centered there. If I right click again and I go to change, I can change the mode, the chain style. So I'm going to put them to be packed, and it's going to bring them in like so. I need to add a little bit of margin on both of them, so maybe 8 on the top, 8 here, 8 here, same way here, 8 on all the 3 sides, and finally to anchor this underneath, this underneath, and margins again. So just a quick layout to be able to have something we can work with. Cool? Questions? Make sense? So I've got 2 buttons. I've got an image preview. I've got some spaces for messages and output. So that's my starting point there. Back to the code side, and referenced all those things. So views, I might want to go ahead and add my log tag in here. Constants, private, static, final, string. Log tag is equal to main activity dot class, okay, simple name, private, image view. What did I call it? I called it image preview, and private button, camera button, and private button. This would be the gallery button. I need the two text views, so private text view, error text. I think, yep, so I called it error text and download private text view, download URL, text. So we got those four, 5 set up. I can finally find them. So find the views, image preview is equal to find view by ID, r.id, image preview. And same thing with the button. So find view by ID, r.id, camera button, and the gallery button. Find view ID, r.id, gallery button, error text. Okay. All right. So now I've got that all set up. I can finally start to hook some things up. So in terms of listeners, you know, when I click the gallery button or I click the camera button, I want to invoke some code to do that operation. So maybe for the camera button, I'm going to add an on-click list or set on-click listener. Yeah, set on-click listener view and log.i. Camera and similarly for the gallery, I'm going to start with it just logging gallery. Okay. Cat. Taking its time to load. There we go. Okay, so if I click on camera, it should just log camera. If I click on gallery, it'll just log gallery. So that's my starting point. Okay, so basic just UI setup. So I've got a skeleton where I can start to arrange these things together. Okay. Now, I do need to do a little bit more here with binding up the view model. I haven't done that yet. Another thing to notice here, in order to initiate this project, this in the first place, I need a URI, right? In order to kick that off, I need to have a URI for the image file. Okay? So it's worth asking, where do I get that from? Okay. I'm going to jump back to my notes, and I want to talk a little about how do we get that. And I'm going to, I previously thought I was going to do this through the camera first, but I think I'm going to go through the gallery first, because the gallery turns out to be a bit easier. And then we'll come back to the camera. So I'm going to skip around in my notes a little bit because of that. Just because the main one that I had the most issues with was the camera. The gallery is a little bit easier to work through. So one of the things that we need to use is something called an implicit intent to make this happen. So implicit intents, remember we've created explicit intents previously to start other activities. When we create an explicit intent, we specify, here's the class, here's the activity you want to start. We say, we have a reference to the class object because it's ours. When we're creating an implicit intent, we're sending them over to another component and not saying what application component that is. What activity are they necessarily going to? And in fact, in this case, if they're going over to, say, the gallery, they're going to be going over there without us specifying what application or what activity they're going to. We just say, hey, we want to get an image file, right? We don't necessarily say what image file we're going to get or sort of what app we're going to go to. So for instance, if they're on a Google phone, they might have one application that is for their photos. If they're on a Samsung phone, they might have a different app, et cetera, et cetera. They may have a different Photos app that they've chosen as their default. Okay. So when we create this implicit intent, rather than providing a class object, we typically provide an action and a category. Okay. So an action says the actions are kind of predefined in the Android system about here's the thing I want to do. So for instance, I want to view something in the browser, I want to capture an image, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. So we're saying kind of this is the action I want to do. Okay, I want it to perform. When we use the implicit intent, the Android system tries to find the appropriate component that can perform that action. The way it does that is it looks in the manifest of all the other apps that are installed, basically, and within activities, you can define an intent filter. An intent filter says, hey, if this happens, I can help you with it, right? So for instance, if we look at our application right now already, we go up to the manifest, right? In the manifest, our main activity already does have an intent filter defined. It's defining, hey, if you want to launch my app, right? Basically, here's my launcher, but you can see the action and the category tags, right? So that filters for implicit intents, okay? So in our gallery app, in the manifest for that, what you would find in like the pick image activity or whatever, you would find an intent filter like this that says, hey, it's the pick image intent, pick image action or whatever. We define that as that action. The Android system, picks it up, saves it when you install the app, so that later when you want to use this, it just pulls it out. Okay. So that intent filter is kind of how you route to other applications. Make sense? Okay. We're not going to mess too much with the intent filter side because we're not receiving those implicit intents, we're sending them, right? So we don't have to define an intent filter if we're just sending it, okay? So once it finds that, it'll then send it there. If there are more than one, if there's more than one that match that intent filter, more than one application, more than one activity that can fulfill that need, then the user will get a prompt or a dialog that says, hey, you've got these 3 Photos apps installed, which one do you want me to use? Right? It'll ask user which one they want, and even oftentimes give them the option to make one of those the default. Right? Now, that used to be kind of the UI for picking pictures. It does look a little bit different. We'll see a new UI because some things have changed. So the way that the picker works is a little bit different. So historically, what we would do is you would start an activity like this. So you would say, hey, let's do start activity, create a new intent, and then I would pass in some sort of string that is the action. So like in this case here, we're talking about capturing images. It would be like media store action image capture. Most of the actions are defined on the intent class, but some other intents are defined on other ones. So in this case, it is, for instance, media store. And I think the one that we want specifically, I think, is on the intent class. So what we're going to do, to get the picker, what we create is an intent with the action get content. So action get content says, hey, I want to get a file from the system. We also can add additional things to it. So for instance, what we want to do is we want to say, hey, I don't just want any kind of file, I want an image file. So to that intent, I can add a type. I can say, hey, I only want image/star. So it can be a PNG, it could be a JPEG, it could be a GIF. We can allow any kind of file type that way. If we want to limit it to, say, just PNGs, I would pass that type as image/PNG. Okay, so that's kind of step one, is we build up that intent. Now let me try just those first two. Let me try that first part. So if I go back to my code, so what I want to do is when the user clicks on the gallery, I want to create this intent, get content intent. Is equal to new intent dot action get content. So I create that. I need to add to that and say, hey, I only want photos. So set type images/star, or was it image/star? I think it was singular. Yes, it was singular. So if I just start with this, let's see what happens if I just try to do that. So I'm going to do start activity, and we're going to use that get content intent. I'm going to just try to start that. So when the user clicks on gallery, it's going to open another app, right? You can see it basically went over to the Files app, right? And now they can pick a file from here if they add a photo. So right now you can see I have no items. I have no pictures there because I haven't signed up with my Google account. I don't have anything there. So I might, for this demonstration, might need to have an image that I can use to just play around. The good news is that your emulators do have a fake camera. So what I can do is go into the camera app. Where is it? There's the camera app. I don't want to take it with locations, so hit next. Okay. And you can kind of see what it mentions here. It's kind of in a virtual environment. It's sort of emulating a 3D environment within this emulator. So you can move it around with the mouse, or you can use the WASD keys to kind of step around it. So I can go in here. I can kind of use the keyboard to turn around a little bit. Is it working with me? Oh, it says press Alt to move camera. There it goes. So if I hold the Alt key, I can kind of look around, right? I can also use Alt then to move around that environment. So in the physical world, if you've got your physical tablet, you would just use the regular camera app and move it around and take that picture. But this environment is just so you can have something to work with. Okay. So I'm going to take a picture here. That's going to save it. The nice thing about that now is that now that that picture has been taken, it's now in my files. And it won't let me get into it because it thinks it's outdated. Anyway, so there's a file there. So if I go back to my application, right? So I click gallery, that came in here. I can now pick that particular image from there, right? So I can go into gallery and pick some of those files, some of those images that I've taken previously. Cool. And so then basically that's going to send it back to our activity, right? We pick it from this other application and then it comes back to us, right? If I wanted to say, hey, I just want PDFs, I would use a different type filter here. If I said I wanted just PNGs, I'd use a different type filter, okay? So there's a few things missing. One of the things is this code as it stands doesn't give me a way to, actually get the result. I need to do some twiddling to be able to get the image that the user picked, because start activity just kind of presumes normally when we're starting activities, you just go into another screen. We don't care what happens in the other screen because they're completely independent. But here we do, right? We care about what did you do on the other screen, and we need to send that result back. Okay. There's a lot of places in Android where you may want to do this. It may be, whether it may be pickers, it may be capturing images. This also happens with the camera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The other thing we need to do specifically with this case is a user may have more than one Files app on their device. And so if I go this way, this is kind of presuming that, first of all, that they have one at all, and kind of going to the default, which we may or may not want. So this is kind of the old way. This is kind of the standard old way of doing this, but we've added something in additional to give applications control over what we call the chooser or the picker, right? So rather than necessarily just going to the default application, we want to give the user the option to pick one. So that's where I needed to add in a little bit of a different work. So I'm going to add a second intent in here. This is going to be what we call the chooser intent. And the way I'm going to construct that is I'm going to say intent dot create chooser, and I'm going to pass in the previous intent that I got, which is get content in intent, and we need a title for that chooser. So we might say, hey, we're uploading an image, so upload image. Okay. And so now rather than starting the get content intent directly, I'm going to start the chooser intent. Cool. So that way, if the user does have more than one way to pick files, that ensures that the user gets that choice. They always get that choice, even if they've picked, quote unquote, a default one. This is, again, a newer feature. We didn't used to do this. We do this now, and so this is a recommended practice. You'll see this in a lot of apps. You'll see this in Facebook, etc., where if you try to upload something, it'll ask you what app you want to use. So, if that fires back up, I'm going to wait for the projector to come back up. Yes.
You know that 205 is open up in the morning. You said there's nobody showing anything about it. I got to
Yeah.
do it online. That's cool.
Oh, yeah, I don't think anybody's using it in the morning.
Appreciate that.
Yeah.
Sorry about
That's fine. Okay, my projector's off. Is everybody watching still on the Discord so you can still see? Okay, good. I'll turn this back on. There it goes. All right, so here, running that. So you can see that it's kind of, when I put this in, it actually didn't seem to do anything. Okay, that's kind of on modern phones. It kind of already does this on already. So if you're working with a little bit of an older phone, though, this may pop up a dialog in between. Right? It might say between which app do you want to use. I think the other thing is here, I just have one app installed that can do this as well. Okay, so that's the kind of starting process. So let's look at how do we get, once I click this, I need that to kick off another process. I need to kick off the actual upload process once the user's picked the image. Okay, so coming back to here, and this applies both to if we're using the camera, if we're using the gallery, we need to get a response from that. Okay. So there's an article on Android developers called Getting a Result from an Activity. And so we're going to pull some of the information from there. Okay. So quotes from here, starting another activity, whether one within your app or from another app, doesn't need to necessarily be a one-way operation. So far they've been one-way operations. You just make it happen and don't get a result. But you can also start another activity and receive results or information back. So for instance, one example where this occurs is, let's say you capture a picture with the camera, and then I need to get the image that you captured. So I need to send a result back. Also here, where we're dealing, you pick something from the gallery, I need to then know what image you picked. Okay. So in here, important note, Android X has kind of recently introduced a new API related to this, related to getting the results. They call it the Activity Result API. Okay. There was an older way to do this, which I used to use. This is brand new. This wasn't here last year that I taught this course. So there's a new way to do this, and so the code examples I go through will be with the new way rather than the old way. Okay. The old way will show up as deprecated if you try to type it in today, but I'm going to try and do the new process. Okay. So when starting an activity for a result, it's possible in cases, and especially in cases of memory-intensive operations, such as if you're using the camera, even working with the gallery, that does require a good bit of memory for that application itself. It's very likely, and it's turned out in a lot of cases, that uses enough memory that it might actually make your app it might destroy the activity and such for your device. That's one of the reasons, as I understand it, for the new API. Because with the old API, if you got killed, you might be kind of stuck and with no way to deal with it, or not an easy way to deal with it. So there are some gotchas. There are some things you need to understand with how that works. is that it is possible that when you go over to or send this implicit intent to go to the other activity, it's possible the activity you just came from, say main activity or my profile activity, could be destroyed. It could be destroyed for it to clear up memory. Also, the view model would go away with it as well, potentially. So just a big heads up. So there is some nuance to how we need to set this up. So for this reason, they say the activity results APIs tries to decouple the result callback from the code where you launch the other activity. So the code where you launch the activity is one place, and the code where you get the results is another place. Okay. Point being is basically we can register the callback when the activity is created, but the launching of the activity actually happens when the user interacts with the UI. So we launch it over here, we receive the response over here. Okay. So the way that we start to set this up is we need to call register for activity result. Okay. So you can kind of see an example here. Register for activity result. That will give us a launcher, and then later we'll use that launcher to actually start the other activity. Okay. When we create that launcher object, we need to provide it two things. We need to provide it a contract and a callback. Okay. So the contract tells it how to actually go do the thing. Actually tells it how to create the intent that it's going to use to start the other activity. It also tells it about how to retrieve the results and what data type that's going to be. Okay. So the good news with contracts is there's a bunch already built in for standard Android things. In fact, we already used one when we launched the login activity, as it turned out, because that was actually using the new API. Okay. So there's a few standard, most of them are under the activity result contracts class. If you follow that link here, we can take a look at some of those standard ones that are out there. So there's things for capture video, create a document, get content, get multiple contents, get multiple documents, open a document, etc., etc., etc. So there's a bunch of these standard processes that you can use those contracts. Okay. If you are using this to kind of navigate with your own activity, with your own within your own application, then you do have to create your own contract. Okay, but for both of these, both the gallery and the camera, I'm going to be using standard contracts. So for specifics, there is a take picture contract, which we'll use to capture the image from the camera. And in terms of picking it from the gallery, we'll be using this get content contract. Okay. If I look at these contracts, there's a brief verb here. It says an activity result contract to prompt the user to pick a piece of content, receiving a content URI as the return, as what it comes back with. And then that we can also mentions that we can use open input stream to access the data from that contract. Okay, so that's the contract I'm going to use. The second thing that we need to provide is the callback, and we're going to pass that as a Lambda function, just a very short Lambda function. It's going to take whatever the result is and then operate on it. So from this we'll get a URI back, and so then we for the image that the user picked, and so we'll use that URI then as we need to. Cool? Everybody good with that? So that's kind of how we're going to kick this off. So we need to find this launcher. The way they suggest defining the launcher is to define it as an instance variable, and they're actually defining it outside of onCreate. The reason that is safe, because usually we don't want to do that. Usually we don't want to declare something out of onCreate. They do say that this is safe because the callback here isn't called until later, right? if that callback would be called immediately, then it would be generally referring to views, and that would cause issues. But the good news is that the callback is delayed until later, after the activity is already on screen and all the views are already set up. So that's where we don't have to worry about like the timeline of it. Okay. So I'm going to find my contract in here in the activity. This is one of those pieces that does have to be in the activity instead of the view model. So launchers, I'm going to say private final get content launcher.
What's the data type?
Oh, yes, I do need to specify the data type. Let me take a look at my notes. So the data type is activity result launcher. And what we're going to get back is a, oh, no, it is a string is the type. Because it takes a string as the input to initiate it. So we're going to have this called get content launcher. We're going to call register for activity result. So register for activity result needs that contract, and it needs callback. So I'm going to say new activity results contract get content. So that's our contract. And then for the callback, this is going to take a URI as a result. That's what the user picked. And from there, I'm going to need to do something with the URI. So one thing for safety, just double check that that thing that comes back is not null, because it is possible if the user, say, maybe cancels out of it, it might end up being that the user didn't pick an image. So I do need to check to make sure that there actually was an image that they picked. So in here I would say, well, if this results is not null, then what I want to do is actually upload that image, right? So I might say, let's call a method upload image, pass in the URI that we received. Or maybe I just call this URI to be more descriptive here. But yeah. All right. Now, the reason I want to move this to another function is because this right here is kind of a messy place to have most of the code, right? If I put things here, it's kind of nested pretty deeply, and it's also up here before on create. I don't want to have a bunch of code up there, right? So it's generally preferable to take whatever we get from these launchers and move it into a separate function. Cool. So I'm going to create that upload image function at the bottom.
Don't we already have that?
I have one in the model. I don't have one in the activity.
Okay, I didn't know it's one or two.
Yeah. So URI. So when we get the result back, it's going to send it over there. Oh, I need to say that the return type is void. Void upload image URI. So we've kind of got that structure. Okay. The next thing I need to do is, rather than explicitly doing all of this with that new way, what I'll just do is I'll take the launcher, so the get content launcher, call launch, and I need to provide a particular input to it. Okay. Now, the documentation doesn't make it extremely obvious what that input string is. What that input string is actually the most common thing that we typically pass. So the thing that we're passing is actually the type of file we want to pick. So here, what I need to pass when I start it is image/star. That's what we're using to launch it. Cool. So this is kind of the new way that we launch it. We create this launcher object, we call launch on it, and then when it comes back, it'll call this function. Are we good with that? Cool. So I can get the result. So let's do a quick thing where I just log the result of what the user picked. So log .I, log tag, user picked plus URI, and just log the URI that I get back. So I should see something on this runs. Gallery, pick that image, and there you can see user picked. There's my URI. Okay. So it starts with content as the protocol. Okay. Content meaning that it's a file on the user system, right? So if I were to take that URI and try to access it from the internet, it wouldn't be accessible. It's local to the user's device. We can see that it comes from COM and or providers media documents. So it's part of the user's documents. It's in the documents folder, and it's got a name of image, special character, 30, and then 31. You kind of see there's some URL encoding on that middle character. Cool? Make sense for everybody? So that's how we can get a file picker kind of thing in here, is we use this launcher. Okay? Questions? All right, next piece. What I'm going to do from here is I am going to call my model and initiate it. But I haven't set up my model yet, so I need to do that. So I am buying the model up. Boop, boop, boop. So private final not final, just private. This is the upload image view model, I think is what I called it. Yeah, upload view model, image upload view model. So that's my model. I'm going to start to bind that up. So model is equal to new view model provider. Passing this dot get image upload view model dot class. So that's going to give me my view model. And I need to bind up the two live data that we had. So get upload error message, observe, and this is going to give us the message. So I want to set error text, set text to the message. So if something fails, that will display to the user. And the download URL .observe, and that's going to give us some sort of URL. Call that download URL. And download URL text. Set text. I'm going to set that to oh, I forgot to pass the first argument to observe. First argument to observe is the lifecycle owner, which is this. You're always missing something. Okay. Within the download URL, I do need to check if this is null. So I do want to say if this is not null, then I do that. And otherwise, we're just going to set it to empty string. Okay, so those things are binded. I'm creating the view model, hook up those two text views. And finally, I want to initiate the model. So model dot upload profile image, and I'm going to pass in that URI for whatever the user picked. So a little bit of binding up there. What did it complain about? Firebase app is not initialized in the process. Image upload. Make sure to call Firebase app first. Okay. Did I get... Because now I'm referring to Firebase. Did I not get my global service JSON in the right place, maybe? I think maybe I was supposed to have it down here. Still not. Where do I have it in the other project? So in movie list, project. Oh, no, it was an app. So I had it in the right place. What am I missing? Firebase app is non-initialized. Process view Ranken. Sure to call the Firebase app. Is there something there I had to do? I don't remember doing that. There wasn't any place, I don't think, previously where we have done that call to Firebase app. Is there? Is there something I'm forgetting? We'll look at the project. Was there something with that we had to do? So it's failing here. It's failing to create the instance of the Firebase instance. Firebase Storage. Default Firebase app. So what if I try to do kind of what it says? I think in the login activity, did we do nothing like that? Okay. I don't remember, I don't think we've seen this error before. Is that correct to me?
Oh, here it is.
Yep.
You might have forgotten this. Make
What?
sure to add your root level build.gradle. This is under dependencies. com.google.gms:google-services.
Oh, right. There is a change. You're right. There's a change to the Gradle file.
I
Okay.
can send it in Discord if you want.
Yeah. Yeah, there's an extra line. Right.
There you go.
Yes. It's up here. That's why. com.google. Just copy over from the other project. That's what I forgot to do. ID com Google GMS Google Services. That's what I get for deciding on the fly to do.
That'll work.
What was the? Well, it's not exactly that, because that's shifted over a
So
little
you put
bit.
yours on the wrong one.
Did I?
Oh no, you put it right one side. What about the other build.gradle? What about the other build.gradle, the project level one? At the bottom of build.gradle for the project, not for the module.
Mm-hmm. There was something we had to
And the
add.
class path, you're missing one.
Oh,
It's the one-
right.
it's the one I
Yeah.
copied. I
Yeah.
didn't realize there were
Okay.
two, sorry.
Yep. That's. I have that from the movie list project. That's correct. So in the on there under that Gradle, I needed to add a class path for GMS, and under here I needed to add that Google Services. That's what I needed to do. Cool. Problem resolved. That's what I get for trying to start a brand new project here and having to set up Firebase again. Okay, gallery, that didn't crash. Pick that. Okay, so it says user picked. Error getting token. Please sign in before you get a token. Okay. Okay. So it wants me, it looks like it ordered access storage. It is saying that I need to be signed in. It looks like I do have to add in a login screen to make this work.
I see.
So what I'm going to do, since we're kind of at the point where I want to say let's not cover everything today. Let's do what we can and cover the rest tomorrow. How can I handle this? I need to drop in a login activity. I need to wire that in. And I was hoping that this would actually show something because this would be the end of the gallery. So is there any way that I can do this anonymously? So I was trying to get this in anonymously. Let me try changing this. All right. And just see if it gives me a different error. So it does still give me the same, it still gives me the same error. So I guess I do have to be authenticated to make this work at all. Okay. So I guess what I'll do is we'll kind of break here for today. You can take, I'll upload this so you can see what we have so far. I'll add in a login screen, and we can talk about finishing this up tomorrow, as well as how to get the camera working tomorrow. Cool? But the idea is, if I had been logged in at this point, I should have been able to go ahead and upload that file and see it operate. Any questions as far as this goes so far? Any questions so far? Okay. It should give you a little bit of what you need to get started, at least on the lab. I think a few people are still polishing up things from previous phase, and that's okay. But this should give you enough to kind of get going. So.